Greetings, ladies and melodies, and welcome to the latest edition on Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet, read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called The Rally, written by Dark Prince 010. As he strode through the doors of the colony hospital, Saya could hardly believe that his family's human friend was dying. Their species was short-lived, a handful of decades indicating a lifelong and well-lived. But it was dwarfed by humans. His grandfather, Saffon, could likely hardly have imagined that the gangly biped that he'd befriended shortly after they were both conscripted into the regional defense force would be a lifelong friend. They'd been enlisted to fight back against the Tranix Enclave, who had been making encroaching forays against stations like the colony and its nearby cluster of worlds. Lumbering slowly but surely through the halls of the hospital, Saya recalled what the humans had told him of his grandfather, and then his father, Sappho. The humans said that he had mourned his grandfather's passing, although the way in which Saya's species heralded a new generation meant that he was never truly gone. Each member of his kind carried within them the seed for the next, and released that seed with an echo of their memories and experiences for the newborn sapling. Still, the lifespan of a human meant that he could bridge that knowledge gap and give true information and retellings rather than vague intuition and fractured impressions naturally passed on. It meant that to Sappho the humans was familiar, and that was further cemented by his kind's care and attention he gave to Saya's father in that first vulnerable years of life as the alien matured and grew, the threat having long since ended. The human had been released from the armed forces and had become an adept merchant and negotiator. Sappho had joined him at his newly founded business, and together the two of them had made an impact as one of the most skilled sets of traders in the entire trade hub. But all things come to an end, and as for Sappho, his time dwindled, and Saya began to bud from his back. He emerged into again the kindly care of the human once again, the face lined in grey. At this point, the human had done something called retiring, something that Saya had to have explained to him several times before he understood as a sapling himself. He had taken on a life of leisure and hobbies and intricate work with colored fused silica and metal, a craft the human was said was called stained glass, an ancient technique from his own world that created beautiful pieces that gleamed in the light. Saya himself had been excited to pursue his calling as a musician, becoming adept at multi-stringed and resonance instruments from his homeworld. For the last dozen times he had visited the human in the hospital bed, then only taken turn after turn for the worst. It started with an initial stumble and fall, followed by a deep sleep with only a few waking and coherent moments. It was hard to imagine such an omnipresent pillar like the human to be something mortal or temporary, and yet as Saya turned onto the hospice wing and approached the human's door, he still felt the looming sense of dread as he realized the finality of the situation was here nonetheless. But as he reached to swipe his card at the door, Saya could hear the sound of voices within. He thought perhaps the human had guests, until he heard the musical jingling trill that he recognized as being an audio bumper snippet for one of the local newscasts. Curiosity overwhelmed him, and Saya opened the door, surprised to see the human sitting up in his bed. His skin was still thin and stretched tight over his bones, and the once thick white hair had thinned into a wispy cloud that seemed to perch upon his head. He saw him and cracked a wide smile and said in a voice Saya hadn't expected to hear again, "Little Saya, come in. I'm glad I caught you. I realized there was something else I had wanted to tell you about." If Saya had a mouth, it would have hung open in disbelief. He had been told that the human would likely be non-responsive, near comatose until they passed. But here they were, sitting up and smiling and acting as if nothing was the matter. His heart swelled with hope as he realized this meant that the human was recovering. "I remember I was telling you about your father and grandfather," the human said with a smile and a wink. "Feels like it was just yesterday that we were talking about them." Saya didn't say anything, but it had been 2 weeks since the human had spoken at all, and 3.5 since he was coherent enough to respond to questions. Finally, hesitantly, Saya asked,
Yes, you were telling me about their hobbies?
The human smiled. Right indeed. Your grandfather never had much time for relaxing, given how often we were on patrol. But in the few moments he was able to catch a bit of a break, he managed to string a small instrument made out of some scraps of shell casings and spare repair panels, along with the stripped-out wiring from a wreck we'd passed early in the deployment. Apparently, it was hard as hell to tune, but he managed to make it work a few times and string along a few tunes before he had to leave the instrument behind during a hasty withdrawal. Saya was shocked, but on some level, it didn't surprise him. It made sense that his grandfather's passion would feed through to him, and the human confirmed as much when they said that before, that Sapphire had loved to frequent the concert halls on their weekends, entertaining business partners there and using the music fitting the space as a conversation starter, an icebreaker for negotiations of countless contracts. I must say that I have nearly forgotten the song that your grandfather had composed. It's one that I noticed your father would hum unconsciously at times, but when I told him of its origin, he seemed sad and said that he had neither the skills nor the tools to make such music a reality. We were on a pretty tight budget back then, and I suspect even commissioning a musician to compose and play that piece for him would have been beyond our means. But, he said, fishing around until he pulled out a battered wind instrument the humans called a harmonica. He chuckled and said, Your grandfather helped me to learn the tune on this back in the day. I'd forgotten I even had this blasted thing until one of the orderlies had brought in a box of my effects from my apartment, and this was sitting on the top. With mounting excitement Saya said,
Would you be willing to teach it to me?
Certainly, the human replied with a hoarse chuckle. Listening carefully, Saya privately cursed his neglect of bringing any sort of instrument along, and instead resolved to memorize as much as he could. It was a short, lilting tune, barely a few bars, but he could see the core of it could be catchy, promising something more. But the human simply grinned as it ended. That's all he had. He laughed at the memory. Our commanding officer was quite cross with us for making, in his words, so much damn racket that close to the enemy lines. There was a knock at the door, and the human's orderly nurse came in, claws carefully curled around a tray of food and a few unopened beverage containers. Oh, excellent, some grub, said the human. Apologies if I am eating in front of you, he said to Saya, whose lack of mouth and sustenance through photosynthesis meant that such a meal was effectively an aromatic decoration in his mind. The alien made a motion of dismissal, saying,
It's fine. It does not bother me if you eat.
A chime went off on his communicator, though, and Saya's elation fell somewhat.
Unfortunately, I must return to the transport hub so I can make it back before my break has elapsed.
Well, it was good seeing you and reminiscing with you, my friend, said the human with a smile, mouth already full of some sort of congealed and vividly colored clear gel. Safe travels!
Safe travels,
Saya said in return, pulling the door shut behind him as the orderly stepped out through. However, Saya saw the orderly's face was not one of excitement for his friend's improved condition, but instead one that Saya recognized as a deep sadness for their species.
What's wrong? Is anything the matter?
The orderly looked at him. Not really anything that could be changed, he said, then looked at the closed door of the human's room. I'm glad that you had a chance to talk with him. Try to make sure that you're in tomorrow for sure. Confused by the request, Saya just made a sign of acknowledgement, returned home. That night, he was up late into the evening, fervently working on refining and extending the tune that the human had given him, originally composed by his grandfather. He was able to finish before the hours dragged too late into the evening, and slept soundly that night, thinking of how proud he would be to show the human the song. But that afternoon, as he went to the human's room, he saw that the human was still again, breathing shallow, and the vitals monitors indicating barely any signs of life within him. It was worse than he'd been even days before, and on some level Saya knew there were only mere hours left. The orderly was there again and gave him a sympathetic look.
I don't understand, Saya said in frustrated sadness. He was getting so much better.
The orderly nodded with a sad smile. That's how it often is with humans. They get better enough to be almost like their old self, with friends and family, and finish any lingering topics or questions they wanted to resolve. After that, they just kind of release and fade quickly after that point. Saya still did not fully understand this, but did understand the importance now of what he must do.
I'm not sure if you can hear me, my friend, he said, but this is for you.
Shaking hands placed upon his instrument, Saya began to strum and sing, music filling the room as the hours passed, until only silence and grief remained to fill the room. End of story. I would just quickly like to thank the T5 peeps: Dragon Soup, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Severin Cerberus, Red Panda 121, Leslie 517, Bushmaster 177, Caspar Arnold, Cam Maxwell, Sans the Skeleton, Lightjock, Dragzoon WRE, and Lord Azrakal. Thank you very much.